Welcome, beautiful soul. It's time to remember who we are. You were born for this moment, this breath. Nature teaches us and reminds us that whatever it is that we are searching for, that whatever our hearts and souls are longing for, we must know our unlimited power and worth. It's all already within us. So thank you for saying yes to this moment. Thank you for saying yes to this journey. And most of all, thank you for saying yes to yourself. Welcome, beautiful soul. Welcome, beautiful soul. I am so grateful that you are sharing time and space to be with us today. I'm very grateful to have you join us for a topic with a very dear soul. So Vani Kapur will be joining us in a few moments, and I can't wait for you to hear from her. This is just such a grounded, beautiful woman who has an amazing open heart and lovely spirit and essence. And so she's going to be talking with me today about how do we honor our inner truth. You know, sometimes it's so easy for us to feel swayed by all that's happening. Even the word truth has become something where there's so much contention and arguing over what is false and what is true. Today, we get to drop down to our inner heart and our inner soul and talk about how do we listen to that still quiet knowing within us. And Vani's going to be able to share her perspective with us. Before we start, you know what we do. We start with breath. So I invite you right now, if you're able to close your eyes and settle into your body for a moment. And all we want to do is simply notice the inhale and the exhale leaving our body, moving in and out of our nose, filling us up at the same time. And this is our time to say thank you to ourselves for being alive and for being here in this moment. Knowing that every inhale nourishes us and every exhale expands into who we are, and then we let go all that is not needed. We're grateful for lovely breath of life moving in and through and with us. And we acknowledge our connection to all of life beyond what our minds can even understand. Okay, and now let's take 1 5 5 5 breath together. That's real easy. We're going to inhale for 5 seconds, hold for 5, and exhale for 5. So go ahead and join me now for a nice deep inhale. And hold it. Slowly let go. And now when you're ready, you can slowly come back and open your eyes. I always say that breath is so delicious. So I'm going to bring on Vani right now. And she has an eclectic, amazing background. And Vani, I just want to say thank you for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure, Michanda, to be in your presence and in this space always.
Well, I am the one who's grateful, and I hope all of you feel like I do by the end of our time of sharing together, just grateful to be around someone who really knows what it means to live from that inner place with such integrity and with such consistency to that. So we're going to dive in, and I want you to get to know Vani the way I have gotten to know her. So Vani, I want you to start with just sharing with us your story leading into how did you even get to understand yourself beyond being a physical being. I mean, I feel like that's what the world focuses on so much. Like, what size are we? How tall are we? What do we wear? And it's like, wait a minute, we're more than a physical being. And I love your story, and I want people to hear your story and weave in for us. How did you begin to understand what many people are coming home to, that we're more than our physical selves?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with a bit of a story because I think each and every one of us has this amazing story that we don't sometimes remember because life just takes over. I grew up in multiple countries. I was born in India. My parents are from southern India. I was born in central India. And then I was taken by my parents to East Africa, to Tanzania, where my childhood was there. And it was a very different culture, but that was my culture. Interestingly enough, there was this young man, this little boy actually, and he and I were getting into a fight. We were about 5 years old, and he said, "You are not even African, so you can't fight me." And I got so mad and offended that he said I wasn't an African, that I punched him. I got into trouble, got into detention. And that evening, I came home and my parents had this conversation with me saying that, yes, you were barely 9 months old when you moved to Tanzania, but your ethnicity, your roots are Indian. Your home is in Tanzania. And now it's up to you how you weave those beautiful strands together to make a quilt of your own. And that was probably the first time that I understood the complexity of what I represented. Here I was, a kid born of two Indian parents, but living in a continent that I grew to love and still cherish and adore. But the folks that I was engaging with did not always look like me. And they too had to understand where my passion and my loyalties and my understanding of culture came from. So, straddling multiple cultures has been ubiquitous with my life as long as I've known it. And after growing up in Tanzania through early middle school, my parents moved to Mozambique, where I completed high school. And this too was very interesting because I went to the only English speaking school in Mozambique, which was a Portuguese colony that had recovered from an arduous independence war. And it was the only school where I could attend and pursue higher education afterwards. And again, we think about physical being, Mishanda, but the physical being is that young person going to school every day, walking into a gated community. And in that school were kids from all over the world. They were Polish, Russian, Italian, South African, and each and every one of them brought their own culture. And so you were no longer one of a kind, but you are one of a kind in a group of several unique individuals. And that is also important because your physical being, what you identify as beauty in one culture, is not what you identify as beauty in another. And that is where, through my life, all the way coming to the US for my undergraduate education, I've always been aware of what is around you, not just what's in front of you or on your being.
I love hearing your story. I mean, I feel like I wish I could go back in time and just be with you, and having that opportunity to have soaked in and been a part of such a beautiful experience of culture. We use that word, and I feel like, it's so narrow for most of us who've lived in just a few places and not many miles different from where we started. And to think about all of the miles that you've traversed and all that you've been able to experience. And then having family to tell a 5 year old about weaving her own quilt. I mean, that in itself to me just speaks to, wow, a level of living that has consciousness from the very beginning, Vani, that your perspective is already looking at, like, wow, I have a say in my story. I have a say in what is truth for me, and to be able to discover that. And I feel like it took me decades, Vani, to like lay down this false I don't know, like edifice of what I so identified with to be able to come home and connect with spirit. And I say that because the child, I think, really knew that. And then somewhere along the way, I lost it. What would you say, was your experience with who you are as this spiritual being and not only this amazing, eclectic, you know, I don't know, like system of experiences is, what I would say.
So it's such an interesting thing you bring it up. I had a visual of this when I saw your prompt questions last night. So when I was in, I think sixth grade, my father was very interested in me learning about different religions. He thought that one should know how Islam works, how Protestants work, how Catholics, how do they pray, what do Buddhists do, and what do Hindus do. So I spent one summer actually visiting and attending religious school at various institutions, and I began to realize, for example, that there were amazing qualities that Buddhism brought to the table, amazing qualities that Catholicism brought to the table. But I think the purpose of my father's effort in that journey was to help me open my eyes and learn that every single spiritual journey brings us value, and it is incumbent upon us to find that value. It is not incumbent on a religious entity to impart that upon you. You have to hold space and understand, what is it that I'm learning and how can I use this to make myself a more elevated person.
Wow, I hope everybody heard that because that is so huge and it's so what an inversion from many of us and how we experience religion. I've shared on this podcast that my experience, at least initially on my path with religion, was definitely from a child, the Catholicism, something that I felt imparted and thrown on to me, something I was given and I needed to digest. And it's not until the later years being able to ask those questions and say, what am I connecting with? What am I bringing outside of what's been, fed to me? And what's the experience of that? In other words, like, how do we bring that to who we are versus letting something define who we are?
Well, speaking of definition, it was a monumental learning opportunity to see one group of individuals pray to a book, another group to pray to a single God, another group to pray to multiple gods, and then you come home and you have to now understand, is what is divinity? It is idolized in a certain way in each of these cultures, but how then do you want to express divinity? How do you want to see it? That is the personalization, I think, that defines how we can express and live in that art of being intentional about how we see spirituality.
I agree. I mean, I think that I talk so much about how when I when I'm in my pondering space, and I spend a lot of time now pondering, and I'm always wondering, how is it? I mean, these are the big ones. Like, how is it that humanity has decided to spend so much of our beautiful energy majoring on minors? Like, we major on what, like splitting hairs of what separates us, even biologically, and realizing, like, wait a minute, if we were able to, like, my science brain comes on and says, like, wait a minute, we have way more in common than splitting hairs on the small differences. And yet those differences make us unique. What's in common is also so beautiful and sometimes gets lost. Same thing spiritually. That, like, here we are, all energy. Here we are, all having this gorgeous essence, this hello, beautiful soul. And yet we get lost in needing to slice and dice and understand from that cerebral place and separate ourselves from one another.
You're absolutely right. I cannot imagine a more direct way of articulating how we tend to perseverate on our differences. But I also think people take comfort in it. There is such weight placed right now on being unique. Brands, marketing materials, everything you see on television is all about how you are special. The
Mm,
humility which comes with saying, I am one of a larger picture, I am but one light, in your words, of a bigger light. What that does is it removes the hubris from the equation and allows you to be humble. And the moment you're humble, you are open to receiving. And the moment you can receive, you can grow. It's almost a requirement to be humble in order to be able to learn. Otherwise, you will just put up more walls.
wow. Yes. Oh my gosh, the humility piece. I think about what brought me humility. And Bonnie, I have to say, like, for me, it was like I had to have big tumbles. I had to skin my knees. I had to fall flat on my face. I had to eat my words. I had to put, feet in my mouth. That is how I learned humility. I can't say that it was like from this graceful place where I was just quietly, by my candle meditating. That my humility that I learned came from realizing the hurt that my words could cause, from realizing that, wow, I had been taught to judge and to criticize and to define what was different. And then seeing that that is a recipe for inflicting pain. And I was floored that, wow, that's not my heart. And yet that's what I was conditioned and following without having consciousness in. And so what was your experience like, and like accepting and recognizing humility? Because for me it hurt and it was painful.
So that's such an interesting question because my family would say that I'm far from being humble. I'm the last of five, very late born, and I was extremely and have always been feisty. It's almost like the Muhammad Ali mindset of, be ready, just always be in the prepared mindset because you never know which way you have to swing. But I think as I matured over time, my father named me after the goddess of learning, Saraswati. And the one thing he would always impart upon me, and my mother would always further emphasize it, is learning is the most important thing you can do in your life. And knowledge is
Mm,
something that no one can take away from you. So
nice.
while being feisty may have been how I showed up in the world, I
Yeah.
always was asked to keep the window or the door or the curtain open to learning. And the moment I kept that door open, opportunities began coming my way. Very subtle, very, very tiny wisps of information. But it was up to me to remember. It could be as simple as me showing up at a translation event and knowing that my Spanish was not fluent. I wasn't fluent, but yet if I could help two or three members translate their medical problems to the doctor who was there, can I make a difference? And am I willing to
Mm,
put myself out there even though I'm not fluent? That is the kind of feistiness, but yet being willing to be vulnerable and being able to accept that you might potentially mistranslate, but does that prevent you from actually supporting other people? That is the kind of vulnerability you learn to curate over time when you're able to keep your heart open to learning. And the feistiness, I would say, is probably the singular thing that has kept me in the graces of success over the years, because you just don't give up. You keep moving forward. And if you see hurdles, you look at them, you acknowledge them, and you troubleshoot them, but you keep going. You don't let it paralyze you, because the only person paralyzing there is you.
yes, and yes, and yes. um wow, I think I know that we are living in such an interesting time where so much I said is shaking, changing, moving, shifting. And to have that sense to pause enough so that I can understand that in my vulnerability of not knowing everything, again, shifting from what I know and what I want to identify as knowing, and then moving to such a heart place and say, from my heart, I know I can offer something and I want to offer something. not because I'm perfect, and letting go of that idea of needing to be perfect and needing to be right, and instead saying, there's a connection that I want to be able to offer because my heart is open to it. That's such a contradiction from a world that at least I was raised in to like be right. And I prided myself as a former journalist. It was all about I needed to be right. I loved having arguments. My husband and I, we laugh at like how our relationship began, like me, needing to be right about things and arguing and sometimes cutting him off because I already knew what your answer is going to be. Let's move on to this. And like realizing like, wow, there's so much I had to learn, like a new language, literally, of living from a heart space. And I say learning it, and yet it was like it was an original language that I had forgotten. Like it was like as I'm learning it, I'm like, wow, this was my original language. I just didn't know it. And so I'm wondering, like, how is it, Bonnie, when you reflect on your life that you've chosen so intentionally to be connected to the heart space?
So I think what I would say is um, I ran for office since I was in middle school. I wanted to always, win the post, the student government post. And this one guy would always win. Every time I ran a race against him, he would always win. And I didn't know why. My resume stood out better. I felt like I was more eloquent, and he certainly did not dress the part. As a middle schooler, I was tracking on that, and that was hard for me. And after in high school, many moons later, I began to realize that the reason people voted for him is because he met them where they were. And I felt that there was a secret there. Here I was doing all the right optics, walking the walk, saying the right things, but he was meeting people where they were. And to me, that is why he won. And I think that is the biggest lesson I learned is meeting people where you are, and all of a sudden doors open.
Yes, I agree. It is so powerful to understand that it's so simple and that sometimes we make it so complicated. And I laugh at you. Yes, in middle school, we all were checking out who was like doing the right thing. Like for me, it was, we all were wearing the same uniforms in Catholic school, but there were small differences like whose pleats were really pleated and who had the coolest socks or the coolest gym shoes to go with their little pleated outfit. I mean, like those are the things that middle schoolers think about, and then we find the real lesson is like, wow, when you sit back and observe, it has nothing to do with any of that. When we ask, teenagers, adolescents, what do they care about? And they'll say, like, I care about fitting in. And then we ask, like, well, who are you trying to fit in with? And then they'll list, like, well, this kid's in this group. And it's like, but wait a minute. Let's ask that group, who are they trying to fit in with? And they'll say, like, they're trying to fit into to something that's outside of us. That's the answer. Until you realize, wait a minute, let's just start connecting with each other as opposed to like needing to fit in and be something on the outside and realizing that all I need to do is learn how to connect with people. That's what we're all yearning for is connection.
And there's another interesting aspect is I quickly realized I didn't come from an affluent family, that keeping up is exhausting. At what point would you have to give up? I mean, those Doc Martens I got in high school after working for a very long time were great, but did it really open the doors I thought they would open? It was when I realized that it's easier to knock on a door, introduce yourself, and walk in as you are, as opposed to setting yourself up a certain way and then waiting to be invited. Why don't we take charge of the narrative and walk into the door that you choose to enter, that you want to go into, and go on your own terms?
Well, you just said that, like knowing who we are. And I don't know. I feel like, I've shared with many people. I think I'm sure I've put it in the podcast before, like how because I was so focused, Vani, growing up and even into my young adulthood in being right, doing everything the right way, um, caring so much about what other people would say or think. I did not have this strong anchor or compass of knowing who I am. And I look at my sons now, they're young men, and it's one of the most important pieces that I'm so grateful that they have learned from me sharing honestly about how much I didn't know is know yourself. Like you're going to keep changing, you're going to keep evolving. It's not in concrete. You're not going to know yourself like on one day and that's it forever. But know who you are at your core and let yourself keep evolving and revealing to you who you are and honoring that. That is such a practice. And it took a stripping away of everything I thought I knew, being title focused, being, the Doc Martens. Yeah, do I have the right? I didn't get any Doc Martens ever. Man, I wasn't cool enough. But like, having the right things to say, like, okay, now I'm here, now I'm there. And the question kept, for me, it was like, well, then what's next? There has to be something next until slowing down and realizing it will never be something next unless that next something comes from the inside because I was so busy chasing. How did you know yourself enough to be able to say, this is who I am? I'm going to bring this person to the table. Where did that come from for you?
So, another story. So, when you enter the U.S. as a visitor or as a student, you fill out this form, and this form, this immigration form, has these boxes, and in these boxes, you check your ethnicity. So they have in there Asian, Pacific Islander, African, um, a whole bunch of denominations. So I was like, oh, okay, I was 16. I came alone to the U.S. To study, and checked African because I was that was my world. Asian because well, my parents are, and it said, well, do you have Asian Pacific? I'm like, well, no. Then I put South Asia in parentheses, and I filled out the form, and I show up at the customs officer, and very kind gentleman. He goes, well, this it has to be refilled, this form. I said, oh, no, no, this is absolutely accurate. I did grow up in Africa. I was an infant, and my parents are Indian, and part of India is in the southern Asian part of the continent, so I think I should recognize that. And he said, no, what I need you to do is refill this, but check the box of where your parents are from. What are your biological origins? And it made me realize that they were asking me to check a box of a country where, yes, my parents came from, but I never lived there since I was a
Hmm.
baby. And when I walked away from that customs officer, I checked the right box, I signed the paper, clearly I'm here. But what I realized then is that we are so keen on identifying boxes that show us who we are. And
Yeah.
I decided that I was going to make myself into a kaleidoscope. Why limit myself to a box or two? Why cannot I be all boxes? And if I'm not a box, then why can't I walk up to said box and say, hey, what is it that you and I have in common? Because my kaleidoscope, if it includes all those boxes, you have to know what the commonalities are. And all of a sudden, I was in college. I took a class in step. I took a class in salsa. I tried to learn Catalan. I tried to sing different kinds of pieces because in order to learn about different boxes, you have to step into them. And
Hmm.
as I saw the results of that, where people loved it, that you were curious, they would want you to come into their home, learn about food, learn about their cultures. I decided that I'm going to continue that. It wasn't a journey that was just going to end at that destination. So now, every day, if I hear an accent, I turn around and say, hey, I hear an accent. Where are you from? They were like, oh, I left Austria 40 years ago. I said, I hear it. She goes, yes, I'm from Vienna. Next thing you talk about, you know, Salzburg and Sound of Music, and there is a connection. And you just
Yes.
entered a box that was not even yours. And that is how, in my opinion, we become acculturized and yet hold space for our own individual interests and become really intricate. That quilt becomes more intricate, more fascinating, more vibrant in nature.
Yes, and yes. One of my favorite words, I have a lot of three-letter words that I enjoy, and one of them is and. That we can be many things. There's an and. It's not an either or. But yes, the mosaic, the quilt, there's an and to us. Kaleidoscopic, yes, that we have so many facets, and you shake it up at one moment and you're going to get this combination. You shake me up a different time in a different set of circumstances, it will look totally different. And yet, there is the uniqueness and the universality within us all, always moving and changing. I read some article that I just had to stop for a moment because it was talking about all the different synapses and, the trillion different changes that are happening within us all the time. And I was like, wow, who first of all counted up to a trillion synapse connections? I'm like, who actually took the time to count like trillion? I don't know how long it would take. And it just made me just in awe that we're so fascinating and so marvelous. And do we take the time to explore who we are individually and collectively so that we can have these connections with each other and with ourselves?
Yeah, no, we don't take the time. We don't. We take our devices and they become this protector that protects us and insulates us from engaging with the world. We sit in our individual rooms with our individual streaming devices. We order food from restaurants that is delivered by somebody we don't know, and we eat it while looking at something else. I feel like, you know, Karl Marx talks about the opiate of the masses. I think we are in our own kind of opiates. We are in our own world, in our own mind. We talk about now these technology. What do you call those when you unplug? I forgot the word. It's a detox of some sort. They actually have
Mm,
programs. And
wow.
there was this piece I read. It was in the Guardian several months ago, and the Brits write very differently. And he talks about how we as a society we want to earn a lot of money, and then we use that money to buy very expensive rich foods which we then enjoy, and then we buy memberships at a gym where we can work said rich food out. Then we are anxious about how we look after it, so we go buy clothes, and then you have to make more money to continue buying those accoutrements. The point being that we are creating our own cycle, right? And what is it that we truly need? You even mentioned this earlier. If the word is love, right? Affirmation and love. If those are the two things you need, what is the Occam's razor, the simplest way to get there, as opposed to all these circuitous ways we get there? Ask ourselves that question. In the moment you're truly honest with yourself, just to yourself, no one has to know, and then you go for that very simple Occam's razor solution, you are already living well.
Nice. Yes.
And all of a sudden, you've broken down so many barriers that you have created for yourself in your own mind. And that is probably one of the reasons why, if you go to, say, Bhutan or even um, the small mercados in Mozambique, people are happy because they're trying to live in the moment. They're thrilled that their children are with them. Everybody's healthy. Everyone's taken care of. Everybody has a job. It is not about where can I get that next hit of success. The living
Mm.
in that moment, and that's the joy that we are robbing ourselves of on a regular basis. And what can we do to stop that and really enjoy who we are right now?
Come on. Yes, yes, and yes. Um, you're you're bringing us back home to what I call presence with the capital P. I mean, yes, there's present tense. We learn that when we learn, future tense, present tense, past conditional participles, all these things. And then I say, no, what about like capital P presence, the right here and right now? We start with breath on this podcast because I always say breath is such a beautiful metaphor and it's always available to us. And when I close my eyes, Vani, and I breathe, all of a sudden, I'm no longer just in this space. I now all of a sudden perceive beyond this physical shell that my soul is a part of. And yet I see that I'm part of something so much bigger. And the joy that can come when we make space for presence. And yet there is a detoxifying when we're so used to going, we're so used to filling and numbing and moving ourselves away from the very place where we're connected and whole.
And I also want to say that there is something to be said about being uncomfortable. Um, we have become very used to being comfortable. Everything is about being perfectly content. But what if there was some discontent? How do we handle that? And if there is a need for discomfort to get to a better outcome at the end of that journey, can we do that? Having some of those uncomfortable conversations, pleading ignorance when you don't know something, it is something that I have embraced. When I don't know something, I will say it. I do not understand this. Can you please
Yes,
explain it? Most often, people will tell you, let me tell you what this means. And then all of a sudden, you have engaged them and you have learned as a result. Going back to that growth mindset, we if every opportunity we had, you know how when we take our kids to the botanical gardens, you show them flowers, you show them the colors, the petals and the grass, and where is the water flowing. Well,
yes,
why can't we do that for ourselves? Why can't we take ourselves into a botanical garden and say, how does this work? And if you ask enough questions, you get the right answers and you can piece that puzzle together. And in an amazing addition of success, your kaleidoscope just got richer as a result of it.
yes. We're part of such a majesty. And I love to explore it. And I think nature is the best mirror for us because we have so much in common. And nature reminds us that, like, wow, the same intricacy that I can see in a gorgeous plant or a tree or a cloud, that's the same majesty that I see when I look at you. When I look at Sonia, who's behind the scenes. So one day we'll have to have Sonia sharing for all of you who want to know how does this all happen. Sonia makes it happen behind the
Oh,
scenes.
she'll be writing
Um,
a book about it all, probably.
she needs to. She needs to. You all need to meet her. She's fabulous. And to me, nature like is like it's. I see the beauty in all. When I slow down and I connect with nature, it reminds me like this is the beauty that's in each of us, and yet we're taught to overlook it. And I love going back and reading, from our our ancestors, our mystic teachers from way beyond who remind us that no, it's this moment that matters, not the next one, not your list to do. It's this one. It's this connection that matters, not the one that you think you need to make. It's the one that's right here in front of you. And can we slow it down to be grateful for that and be grateful in this moment, even if this moment is uncomfortable? Can I find the beauty right here and right now, and even right within, as opposed to outside?
And what if we take that beauty and find affirmation within it, where we don't then pine for affirmation from outside? All of a
Come
sudden, you
on.
have it inside you, and you're this walking, glowing stick, and you literally can walk into any door and hold your own. I say this particularly to women and women of color, young women in particular, who right now are seeing a lot of change in the way their bodies are being looked upon, how laws are being treated. I think encourage each other, boost each other, come to the
Yes,
table as that collective light and walk through any door that you seek to enter and educate them on your power. And that collective power is undeniably strong. It is like a storm
yes.
that's coming through, and you know you need to take shelter because it is way too powerful. And it's
I love
controlled.
that.
It is controlled and it is provided and is protecting and is incubating your amazing ideas.
I mean, that's so gorgeous. You're taking me back to a conversation with another beautiful soul, and I hope I can have her on here at some point. And you have to look up Abba Arthur. She's an actress and just a lovely, exquisite being. And I watched her do, an interview after we watched one of her films that she was in. And she said that when she goes into auditions and she knows that sometimes there's no one who looks like her in the room, she remembers this African proverb that, like, wherever you go, walk as though there are 3,000 ancestors with you. And she says she takes that to heart, that when she's walking in that space and she knows she doesn't look like maybe what they had in mind, and she just holds her head up and she breathes and she has this grace to know that I am not one, I am now one of 3,000 ancestors who walked in this room. And, Rumi has a quote about that. Like, yes, you're not one, you are 1,000 lanterns. Like, you are, we're so much more than what we think. We're not the drop in the ocean, we're the entire ocean in a drop. And the more we can walk in that, Bonnie, I believe the more that we'll be able to authentically be who we are, be that truth, which ultimately I would synthesize it all to say we are that walking compassion and grace and love and kindness and gentleness. And that affirmation can live in us when I remember who I am.
And I also think, the chair that we occupy, right? The different positions we occupy as we succeed in our lives, that chair is not just ours. It's just not, doesn't belong to us. We've heard, multiple religions and belief systems talk about this. We are just merely passing through. So if this
Yes.
chair we have affords us some power, what are we doing to elevate those voids, those gaps that need to be addressed? It is not always just about learning, but it's also about imparting and advocating. Because if you have a chair that holds power and holds sway and you remain silent, you're not helping the people who are coming behind you. Whereas if you stand there and you advocate, every time you advocate, not just for yourself, but those 30,000 beings that are behind you, beside you, who don't have a voice, you have made change happen. And that is also a mindset that you have to carry with you while being open to learning.
So beautiful. Well, of course, you and I could talk for days, and I'm aware of time, so I want to ask two more questions before we
Please.
wrap up. One, I'd like to know, what is something that life has taught you that you're aware of, and what is it that you hope to see humanity experience? What do you hope to bring? So we'll start with the first one. Like, just what is it that life has taught you? What have you learned? If you have to sum it up in this moment, you might say something different, tomorrow or next week. But in this moment, what would you say life has taught you?
Life, I think, overall, just given all the hardships and survival that I have had to navigate, is that you have to be like that duck that swims upstream, because she needs to get there. She needs to get to her family. She needs to get to her nest, whatever it is. And the water is relentless. It is not going to stop. There might be a heavy rainy day where the water takes over and navigating gets harder, but you just never stop. You keep swimming upstream, because the very definition of being relentlessly successful and staying focused is to not let the noise, not let the obstacles impede you from that ultimate goal. You keep walking the walk. We would not be here, be able to vote, be able to advocate for a lot of things that we do today if others before us had not done the same thing. And it is incumbent upon us, for the people who come after us, that we continue swimming upstream and don't stop. And in terms of, this is in very much in line with humanity. um,
Yes.
there's a lot of atrocities happening in this world. Oftentimes we read the news and we lament and we get frustrated. Take a moment and say, with that capital P, what can I, sitting in my little chair, what can I do? Maybe it's a small contribution. Maybe it's going to a protest. Maybe it is sitting on your very verbal, vocal social media and raising awareness. Maybe it is stepping up and going into another powerful door, knocking on that door and advocating for what you believe in. Just don't sit there in lament. And I think if each and every one of us took action, then humanity would be at a very different place than it is today.
Yes. And if you had that magic wand and you could whip us into whatever you imagine, what would it be?
I would say that we are all, and I know this is not a satisfying answer, but I feel like this the world is an evolving, living thing. I
Yes.
cannot give you a perfect, this is what the future should look like, because that is my very small definition of what the world should look like. I feel like that would be unfair. But what I will say is that if I had a magic wand, I would ask every human being to be able to get up in the morning filled with gratitude, go to sleep in the evening filled with gratitude. And between the waking and the sleep time, every time they engage with the world, to put their best version forward. No matter what the outcome is, keep putting your best version forward. Because if each and every one did that, and I think your podcast had it too, a butterfly effect, then the next person would try to do the same. And that is the only aspiration and hope that I would have for the world ahead of us.
Well, that is so beautifully said. And so I am going to thank you, Vani, for giving your time and space with us today. I am so grateful. Vani talked about gratitude as she wrapped this up, that yes, if we can make space for that gratitude, if we could live a life where we understood what it means to be grateful, and let that gratitude usher and open us into being the fullness of who we're called to be, to walk that out without shrinking, with courage, with boldness, and with a grace. And so I'm just so elated that you shared your perspective with us. You shared your story and stories with us, because we each have one. And that's what this podcast is about. It's about recognizing that each of us is a beautiful soul. So I thank everyone for giving your time and space to join us today. I'm so grateful that you were able to be with us. And I hope that you consider liking this episode, sharing this episode, subscribing, because we want the light to expand. Yes, to the butterfly effect. And yes, to every one of us slowing down to make space for gratitude, so we stay connected to why we are here and honoring our purpose, our voice, and our truth. Thank you so much, beautiful soul. Thank you, beautiful soul, for remembering who we are and for making time and space to be with us today. As you go forward on your journey to the known and unknown places, continue to listen to your inner heart and honor your soul, because your answers are always within you. Please consider supporting us and spreading more light and love with this message by simply liking the video below, subscribing, and consider sharing as well. Most of all, take gentle care and breathe. We see you. We thank you, beautiful soul.